On July the 16th of 2022, a Welsh woman by the name of Rebecca Press accompanied her mother's best friend for a night of revelrous drinking in Elliotstown, Caerphilly. The 31-year-old had been staying with her mother following a breakup, and according to subsequent reports, she'd been drinking in the house during the hours leading up to her night out with 57-year-old Mark Ash, who lived next door. The pair reportedly went to the New Tredegar Rugby Club and the Dynevor Arms pub, then headed back to Press's mother's house before midnight. Upon arriving back home, Press was informed by her brother Gavin that the man from whom she'd recently split had been having an affair. In a fury of unfettered emotions, Press grabbed a 3-inch kitchen knife and plunged it into Ash's chest while he was trying to calm her down. She then walked into her mother's bedroom and calmly stated that she'd stabbed her best friend. Press fled the scene before the arrival of law enforcement, but she did leave a chilling message on her ex-boyfriend's phone in which she divulged, "I've just stabbed someone and killed them. I've just murdered someone. Please phone me now." In the early hours of the following morning, the police located Press and took her into custody on suspicion of murder, to which she feigned shock and ignorance, saying to the arresting officers, "On suspicion of what? What? Has someone died?" In court, it emerged that in addition to the copious amounts of alcohol she'd consumed prior to the fatal stabbing, Press had also taken 4 Valium earlier in the day, which had only served to make her more unstable and unable to think clearly. The woman initially denied murder, claiming self-defense, but changed her plea to guilty 5 days into the criminal trial. In January of 2023, she was sentenced to life in prison with a minimum term of 20 years. Number 7. Michael Golsorki. Greater Manchester Police were called to the parking lot of a Premier Inn in Stockport one day in the fall of 2019 after receiving reports that a heavily intoxicated man was attempting to have intercourse with a pile of leaves. Upon arrival, officers attempted to coax the man out from the bushes where he'd hidden himself after his public display of intimacy was witnessed by several families who were dining at a restaurant next door. After about 10 minutes, 26-year-old Michael Golsorki finally emerged from the bush. He gave no explanation for his actions while being taken into custody for public indecency. Following his arrest, it was determined that Golsorki had consumed undisclosed amounts of alcohol, cannabis, and cocaine before the incident. Hotel staff had reportedly noticed him acting suspiciously in the parking lot right before he dropped his trousers to his ankles and began thrusting himself on a mound of fall leaves. Golsorki, who was said to be entirely embarrassed by his behavior, was jailed for 8 weeks and ordered to pay a $158 fine as a consequence for pleading guilty to cannabis possession and public indecency. Number 6. Abigail Canannnington. The police in Miami, Florida were called to the 5500 block of Northwest 12th Court on the night of January the 7th of 2023. 20-year-old Abigail Canannnington was accused of going berserk during an argument with one of her roommates whom she repeatedly stabbed with a kitchen knife. The resulting arrest report detailed that Hennington and the female victim had begun arguing after the latter mentioned that her phone was missing. The third roommate, a man, told law enforcement he'd just left the apartment to speak with a neighbor when he heard a sudden pained scream from inside. He rushed back in to find the victim bleeding and walking towards the front porch before collapsing on the floor. Hennington fled the scene while the injured roommate was taken to a local hospital to undergo surgery. A short time later, officers tracked Hennington down to a gas station where she was taken into custody on a charge of attempted murder. She was held at the Turner Guilford Knight Correctional Center without bond. Number 5. John Ralph. Deputies from the Carter County Sheriff's Office in Tennessee were dispatched to a house on Reynolds Road, shared by an elderly woman and her adult son, on April the 6th of 2019. The homeowner, 76-year-old Edith Betty Ralph, was found dead inside with a number of severe injuries to her body. She had not only sustained blunt force trauma to the head, but also presented with multiple gunshot wounds. After an investigation was launched, detectives learned that the victim's son, John, had made several suspicious statements to friends, family, and co-workers that indicated he might have been involved in the killing. The 51-year-old reportedly told relatives that living with Edith had been driving him crazy. Furthermore, on the day the body was discovered, John had asked colleagues to take pictures of him at work because he'd need an alibi if anything happened to his mother. Authorities intercepted the man at Hartsfield-Jackson International Airport in Atlanta, where he was attempting to board a flight to Amsterdam. He was arrested and held at Clayton County Jail in Georgia on a $1 million bond pending his extradition back to Tennessee. John eventually agreed to a plea deal that reduced his charge from first-degree murder to second-degree murder. He was sent to prison for 22 years and, as per state law, wouldn't be eligible for release until serving out the entire sentence. Number 4. Nude Texas Man. In April of 2016, articles surfaced online about an incident involving a completely naked man roaming a suburban neighborhood in Austin, Texas. The eye-catching headlines were supplemented by a video in which the individual, who wasn't named, could be heard babbling nonsensically as he sat on the ground in handcuffs, surrounded by police officers. Law enforcement had reportedly been called to the scene after receiving reports about the nude man taking letters and papers right out of people's mailboxes and trying to eat them. In the recording, it's clear that the man was exceedingly intoxicated at the time of his revealing outburst, but it wasn't publicly disclosed what substance or substances he'd ingested. Amid intermittent singing, laughing, and chatting, the man at one point lay down on his back and reiterated, "I'm sentient, I'm alive," as though needing to confirm it for himself. When an ambulance finally arrived to take him to the hospital for evaluation, the man breathed a sigh of relief, saying, "Thank you, Gary. Thanks, everybody. All right, show's over." He then shouted, "I am Merlin," as he was being taken away. The individual who posted the video online captioned it, "A man on drugs attacked my mailman and ate my 1099 tax form. Seriously." Number 3. Malcolm Waite. A deadly car accident took place on the A149 road in Stalham, Norfolk, England, on July the 31st of 2022. Responding police officers discovered that a Lexus RX SUV had mounted the curb while traveling at speed and consequently made contact with a pair of young women on the sidewalk. One of the victims, an unnamed 16-year-old girl, survived the collision with only some cuts and bruises. Meanwhile, 20-year-old Fenella Hawes, who was reportedly carrying flowers when she was hit, died at the scene. In the tragic incident's aftermath, one of the officers who subsequently took the driver of the Lexus into custody described him as the drunkest person he's ever seen behind the wheel of a car in his 10 years on the force. The ensuing police investigation established that the weather and road conditions had been more than adequate on the day of the crash, and the Lexus was in perfect working order. The motorist, 68-year-old Malcolm Waite, was thus identified as the sole reason for the fatal accident. When news of Waite's arrest surfaced online, the police released body cam footage of the moment he was removed from his vehicle, which he wrecked after driving another mile down the road. In the video, he slurred his words as he sat in the driver's seat next to a bottle of vodka. Waite refused a breathalyzer test and was taken to James Paget University Hospital in Gorleston, where his blood alcohol content was measured to be nearly 5 times the legal limit. In November of 2022, the man was jailed for a period of 8 years after pleading guilty to causing death by dangerous driving. He was also banned from driving for 7 years after his release and would need to complete a driving course in order to have his license reinstated. Number 2. Janette Oliver. A Chicago woman's unhinged attack on a teenage girl's pet dog in December of 2022 resulted in her facing criminal consequences. According to local media, 61-year-old Janette Oliver sparked up a conversation with the 15-year-old girl while she was out walking her family's Chihuahua near Oliver's residence on West Irving Park Road. Moments into their interaction, Oliver suddenly seemed to lose control of herself as she lunged for the dog and stabbed him with a knife. The girl took off with her injured canine, but Oliver pursued them and plunged the knife into the animal several more times. After that, she fled the scene, dropping the blade about a block away from where the altercation occurred. The teen girl's father reportedly tracked Oliver down and held her until law enforcement arrived to arrest her. She was charged with aggravated cruelty to an animal and aggravated assault. Many were left concerned about the dog named Bebe following the unprovoked attack, but fears were alleviated when the Garrido Stray Rescue Foundation updated the animal's prognosis on social media. The post revealed that Bebe had undergone surgery for his serious injuries, but that he was expected to make a full recovery. Number 1. Raquel Figueroa. On the morning of January the 10th of 2023, Raquel Figueroa went haywire inside a Mediterranean restaurant in Brooklyn called Cava, where his ex-girlfriend worked. The 42-year-old man reportedly barged into the eatery by hurling a chair at the front door, then repeatedly stabbed his ex with a knife. The victim, 39-year-old Irene Guzman, was brought to a hospital where she was said to be in stable condition. Figueroa subsequently went on the run, prompting Guzman to go into hiding for fear of suffering another attack at the hands of her violent ex. The woman's family were revealed to local media outlet News 12 that Figueroa had come after her on 3 separate occasions over a 2-month period. He'd been wanted since December the 4th of 2022, when he allegedly slashed her face and was consequently given a temporary restraining order. A few days after the incident at Cava, the NYPD finally apprehended the man, according to Guzman's family. On September the 27th of 2020, Britney Muhammed and her boyfriend Manuel Artiega, both in their 20s, assaulted a ticket agent at the airport in Miami, Florida. The couple had planned to return to California, where they both resided, but were instead arrested for their unruly behavior. Muhammed and Artiega reportedly grew irate after an American Airlines employee explained they wouldn't be allowed to board the plane barefoot. Muhammad proceeded to jump over the counter and attack the agent, while shocked witnesses recorded the incident. The woman kept screaming about how she wouldn't leave while her boyfriend attempted to pull her away from the airline worker. When Miami-Dade police arrived at the airport, the couple drunkenly began yelling at them, demanding their badge numbers and challenging the officers to arrest them. Following a brief struggle, the pair were handcuffed and taken into custody. Both Artiega and Muhammed were charged with battery on a police officer, resisting arrest, and disorderly conduct. Number 9. JetBlue passenger. In October of 2020, a male JetBlue passenger traveling from Kingston, Jamaica to JFK Airport in New York went on a racist rant prior to takeoff. The man, who wasn't identified to the public, appeared to be intoxicated in recordings of the incident, which showed him wearing a Burger King crown as he screamed at a woman who'd allegedly assaulted him. The unruly passenger proceeded to use the N-word multiple times, going red in the face as he hurled insults, even after the flight attendants attempted to calm him down. In the aftermath, he accused a fellow passenger of kneeling him in the stomach, leading to his outburst. However, it subsequently emerged that he'd lost his temper after being told there was no available overhead space for his bag. Police were called to the scene to remove the man from the aircraft, and JetBlue officials banned him from using the airline for life, saying they have zero tolerance for racism or harassment. Number 8. Philip Charles Jones. Minnesota man Philip Charles Jones was charged with second-degree murder in the aftermath of a brawl at his Ramsey County apartment complex on December the 20th of 2021. 39-year-old Jones, who went by the nickname Gunner, attacked his neighbor Carlos Bensalado Roca, who'd asked him to remove his belongings from the hallway. When police arrived, Jones denied striking Roca, claiming he'd seen his neighbor stumbling drunkenly in the hallway before he tripped and injured himself of his own accord. He even claimed to have helped Roca get back to his apartment. Roca, meanwhile, accused Jones of punching him in the face. 7 days after the initial incident, police arrived at the complex once again, this time to conduct a welfare check on Roca. His mother had grown concerned after not hearing from him for several days. The front door to the apartment was locked from the inside, so first responders had to gain entry through a window using a ladder truck. They found 51-year-old Roca's body on the floor, as well as a large blood stain on the mattress. An autopsy concluded he died from severe blood loss caused by Jones's blow. The latter, who had a history of arrest for weapons possession, receiving stolen property, theft, and disorderly conduct, was subsequently charged with unintentional second-degree murder. Number 7. Kevin Dean Parish. 20-year-old Kevin Dean Parish was arrested on January the 21st of 2013 for placing his grandmother's Chihuahua pincer mix in an oven at the family's residence in Lyons, Oregon. Parish, who lived with his grandmother and brother, was asked to look after the former 6-year-old dog, Kudo, while she was away. However, on the 18th of January, the young man was preparing dinner when he stopped to check on the dog, who was resting in its kennel. According to Parish, Kudo lashed out at him and tried to bite him, causing him to lose his temper. He admitted to punching the dog several times before forcing it out of the kennel and strangling it. He then shoved Kudo into the oven, which had been preheated to 350 degrees Fahrenheit. Parish only removed the dog from the oven when his brother returned home, by which time it had sustained severe injuries and burns to its head and legs. The siblings took the dog to the veterinarian, and their father called the police soon after, at which point Parish was taken into custody. Number 6. Porsche Tyler. 34-year-old Porsche Tyler attacked a fast food worker on January the 27th of 2019 after she was given the wrong order at a Burger King in Livonia, Michigan. She'd reportedly ordered a burger to go, requesting it be served without tomatoes. Tyler returned to the fast food restaurant the following day, emphatically demanding a refund. When she was told that she could have a complimentary replacement meal but not a refund, Tyler lost her temper. Security cameras captured her tantrum, during the course of which she threw food, knocked over a cookie display, and even tossed a wet floor sign at employees. Police were called to the scene, but by the time they arrived, Tyler had left the restaurant. She resurfaced on March the 11th after making a similar scene at a Cricket wireless store. Tyler had destroyed a display when employees explained she could only get the cell phone she wanted with a new contract. She was arrested and charged with larceny, disturbing the peace, malicious damage to property, assault and battery, and disorderly conduct. Number 5. Brandy Wooten. Blogger Brandy Wooten posted a video of herself verbally berating a restaurant manager at a McDonald's drive-thru in California after she was told she'd have to wait for cookies. Wooten shared the video with her 40,000 followers, claiming that although she'd called in advance to make sure the cookies would be ready when she arrived, the manager made her wait an additional 2 minutes for a fresh batch. Wooten, who recorded her entire interaction with the employee, was asked several times to pull out of the drive-thru line and wait for her order to be ready. When the unruly customer refused to move her car, the manager instructed one of the employees to give her a refund, but Wooten continued to scream at the staff. The manager in turn began recording Wooten, who stated her full name and asked that people follow her on Facebook. The video came to an end after Wooten finally received her refund, at which point she insulted the manager one last time and drove away. The recording of the incident quickly went viral, though viewers were largely split on whether Wooten's behavior had been appropriate. Number 4. Peter Usam and Malik Lee. Virginia residents Peter Usam and Malik Lee were arrested after wrecking a Stafford County car service shop on October the 18th of 2021. 36-year-old Lee and 31-year-old Usam, along with 2 other friends, arrived at Mega Auto Outlet and indicated they needed to get their car fixed urgently. When they were told their vehicle wouldn't be ready for 4 days, the men lost their temper. They were instructed to leave after they began shouting at workers, but they refused. During their outburst, Lee and Usam reportedly punched an employee, overturned desks, and threw computers around the shop. The assailants' friends pulled them away and forced them into the car before fleeing the scene. Police managed to locate the vehicle on Interstate 95, and after pulling them over, officers arrested Usam and Lee on charges of assault and battery, as well as felony vandalism. Number 3. Kaya Rowley. On September the 20th of 2019, a 6-year-old from Orlando, Florida, was arrested for throwing a temper tantrum at school. Kaya Role's grandmother, Marilyn Kirkland, was called by school administrators, who informed her that the girl had been handcuffed and taken into police custody after kicking an assistant principal. Orlando police had reportedly taken the girl to the juvenile detention center on a criminal charge of battery. Kirkland was shocked to learn the specific circumstances of her granddaughter's arrest, which included having to be fingerprinted and even posing for a mugshot. The rest of Role's family was similarly appalled by the treatment the young girl had received at the hands of law enforcement officers. They subsequently set an official complaint into motion, which led to the arresting officer being fired for failing to get permission from a supervisor before detaining a child under 12. The family also lobbied to make it illegal for any child under the age of 7 to be arrested unless they'd committed a violent crime. 3 years after the incident, Role was still suffering the consequences of the traumatic experience, having been diagnosed with PTSD in the wake of a highly publicized arrest. Number 2. Rebecca Chisel. While serving out a prison sentence for attacking a love rival in public, 23-year-old Rebecca Chisel was found guilty of a second assault, which had taken place on November the 26th of 2021. Multiple guests at the hotel where Chisel and her 2 roommates had been staying filed complaints against them for making loud noises throughout the night. The group was thus asked to leave the hotel, so they gathered their belongings and walked down to the lobby. Instead of leaving, however, Chisel began screaming at the top of her lungs and cursing at employees, eventually blowing vape smoke into the manager's face and punching her in the head. By the time Chisel went to trial for the hotel incident, she'd already been sentenced to 16 months in prison for attacking a woman who'd been dating a man she was interested in. She forced the other woman to the ground and dragged her by the hair before punching and kicking her multiple times. The victim suffered 2 black eyes and a broken nose, as well as multiple bruises. Chisel pleaded guilty to assaulting the hotel manager and was sentenced to 6 extra weeks behind bars. She was also ordered to pay $200 in restitution. Number 1. Emma Walsh. On April the 10th of 2022, Emma Walsh fatally stabbed her 36-year-old boyfriend, Gary Morgan, at her home in Liverpool, England. Walsh and Morgan had spent the night at a bar before returning to the former's apartment, where she violently attacked him with a knife, stabbing him in the heart. After being arrested, 31-year-old Walsh told police she'd acted in self-defense. Authorities didn't believe her, as she reportedly had a history of violence. There were also hundreds of text conversations that indicated she'd been abusive throughout her relationship with Morgan. In the messages presented to the jury during the ensuing trial, it was made evident that Morgan had attempted to break up with Walsh on multiple occasions and that she regularly insulted him. At different times, she even stabbed him with a butter knife and hit him with a rake prior to their deadly altercation. The victim's family had been told about Walsh's violent outbursts, which had prompted Morgan to tell the woman, "I want you out of my life. I'm not staying around to get killed by you." In court, the prosecution attempted to convey to the jury that the stabbing hadn't been the first time Walsh had attacked one of her partners. Prior to getting involved with Morgan, she'd allegedly stabbed a former boyfriend named Aiton Courtney Stevens. At the culmination of the trial, Walsh was unanimously found guilty of first-degree murder. During sentencing, presiding judge Andrew Menery told her she'd attempted to dominate Morgan's life. He further admonished Walsh for showing no remorse for her actions and instead trying to shift the blame on the victim. Judge Menery sentenced her to life in prison with the possibility of parole after 18 years.
What are you doing?
In Dad's car. Please don't, officer.
Stop.
I can't find it.
Relax. Stop.
The Monroe County Sheriff's Office in Wisconsin received a call from staff members at the county courthouse in the city of Sparta on December the 17th of 2022. Dispatch was informed that a woman who'd only recently been released from custody was spotted trying to break into cars parked outside the courthouse. Jail staff monitored the situation while awaiting the arrival of deputies. As an officer approached the subject, identified as 31-year-old Rebecca Nichols, she tried to ignore him and walked away. He addressed her by her first name, at which point she became agitated and said she'd only been trying to get into her brother's vehicle, which was untrue. The policeman eventually caught up with her and she initially stopped retreating, but she then started pulling on the door handle of yet another nearby car, so he moved to place her in handcuffs. Nichols proceeded to continually pull her arms away, ignoring the officer's commands to calm down and stop resisting. According to subsequent reports, the unruly woman had only been released from custody a few hours before her contentious police encounter. She had reportedly faced several counts of bail jumping for violating her court-ordered GPS restrictions. Nichols continued her defiance as she was escorted back into the courthouse, and throughout the ensuing booking process, at certain points striking and slapping the officers as well as jailhouse employees. In the wake of her eventful day at the Monroe County Courthouse, Nichols faced a felony count of attempted battery by a prisoner and a litany of misdemeanor counts including disorderly conduct and attempted entry into a locked vehicle, in addition to her previous counts of bail jumping. She was later released again on a $500 cash bond, but because of subsequent violations was issued a bench warrant and taken back into custody. Her cash bond was subsequently elevated to $1,000. Number 6. Luke Hawks. On November the 8th of 2022, 28-year-old Luke Hawks was traveling down the A38 Taunton Road in Bridgewater, Somerset, England, at unlawfully high speed. After Hawks ignored a traffic light, his Ford Transit blazed into the intersection of the A38 and St. John Street, barreling into the side of a white Citroen. The vehicle Hawks collided with was occupied by 19-year-old Bethany Branson and her best friend, who was driving. The pair had reportedly gone out for a milkshake when the accident occurred. Branson was thrown from the car as a result of the violent impact and was later pronounced dead from the catastrophic injuries she'd sustained. When law enforcement arrived on the scene, Hawks was extremely agitated and verbally abused the officers who moved to arrest him. He refused to complete a breathalyzer or swab test for drugs and alcohol and was even recorded saying, "I hope I killed someone." The Wadham Close resident was reportedly out on bond at the time. He'd previously been arrested for unrelated offenses and was rushing to get home before his court-mandated curfew when he plowed into the innocent motorist. Arresting officers also stated that Hawks smelled of alcohol when they encountered him at the scene. In court, it was revealed that earlier on the day of the accident, the man had been involved in yet another traffic collision further up the A38 near the Showground roundabout. 3 additional people, including Hawks himself, were left with minor injuries as a result. In January of 2023, he was jailed for 10 years after admitting causing death by dangerous driving and failing to provide a specimen. He was also disqualified from driving for a period of 12 years and 7 months. Number 5. Elizabeth Long. During a 2016 Christmas season, authorities in Yakima County, Washington, received complaints from several local residents who had packages stolen off their front porches. The sheriff's office was able to use surveillance footage of the thefts to identify the porch pirate as 37-year-old Elizabeth Long. The latter would tail delivery trucks on their route, then pretend to be the owner of the homes where parcels were dropped off. She already had an outstanding warrant in connection with an unrelated felony offense, and reports by the local press indicated that she was eventually apprehended. However, around Christmas time the following year, Long was spotted by video surveillance nabbing packages off people's porches yet again. Yakima police took her into custody for the 2nd year in a row, dubbing her the real-life Grinch. Number 4. Kelvin Guzman. Shortly after 7 p.m. on May the 26th of 2022, undercover police officers in Springfield, Massachusetts, carried out a traffic stop in the area of Fort Pleasant Avenue. As a detective began to exit an unmarked vehicle, he was suddenly rushed by the individual they were targeting, 23-year-old Kelvin Guzman. The latter crushed the officer's leg with the passenger side door. Guzman was subsequently restrained by detectives, aided by ATF agents who were assisting with the Hampden County Sheriff's Department's investigation. The suspect, who had 3 prior convictions for distributing a Class A drug, was out on bail at the time. Authorities received a tip that he had a gun in his possession, a violation of his release, which prompted the traffic stop. There was a large capacity firearm loaded with 11 rounds of ammunition removed from Guzman's waistband when he was arrested. There was also reportedly about 25 grams of crack cocaine in his pocket. The detective who'd been attacked was taken to Bay State Medical Center with severe leg injuries, but was expected to be released after a few days. Guzman was hit with a myriad of additional charges, some of which were quite serious. including counts of cocaine trafficking, as well as assault and battery with a dangerous weapon. Number 3. Alisa Barrick. North Carolina teen Alisa Barrick went viral after posting her own mugshot to social media in December of 2014. The 18-year-old Raleigh resident had reportedly been arrested on charges of possession of a Schedule IV controlled substance with intent to distribute. She captioned the image of her booking documents with "surrendered myself at 7 a.m., got released at 11:30 a.m., before adding, "and my mugshot's cute." Barrick was henceforth known as Cute Mugshot Girl by internet users, many of whom she proceeded to casually chat with in the replies below her original tweet. In one exchange, the teen was asked what she'd done, to which she responded, "Xanax, homie." The social media star subsequently made headlines again a few months later after being taken back into police custody for shoplifting in March of 2015. Barrick remained relatively silent online about her latest run-in with the law. Number 2. Wendy Jones. A woman calling herself Rosa accompanied a man back to his room at the Cosmopolitan Hotel Casino after meeting him at the Vespa Bar along the Las Vegas Strip on February the 21st of 2021. After getting to the room, the pair ordered room service and drank a couple of margaritas. Rosa reportedly insisted that the unidentified man finish his entire beverage, which he did. He subsequently fell asleep and didn't wake up until late the following morning, whereupon he realized that he was missing $1,500 from his wallet, as well as his Audemars Piguet or AP royal watch valued at approximately $37,000. Believing he'd been drugged and robbed by the woman, he reported the incident to the police. A similar situation unfolded at the Cosmopolitan about a month later, when a different man brought a woman supposedly named Sarah back to his room for drinks. He fell asleep soon after, then awoke to find that his phone was missing, along with his Rolex Daytona worth about $45,000. The man told investigators that Sarah said she was visiting from Arizona, but he was able to describe a distinctive diamond tattoo he noticed on her stomach, as well as large tattoos on her chest and leg. The description enabled Las Vegas police to identify and arrest 23-year-old Wendy Jones in connection with both thefts. She was taken into custody on April the 4th, but declined to speak with investigators and was subsequently released on bond. Prior to Jones's arrest, the police received a call from a man who claimed to have been targeted in a similar scheme as the young woman's previous 2 victims. They weren't able to link her to the third crime until later on in April, when she was arrested for a second time. The latest theft had occurred on March the 31st, when Jones, once again calling herself Sarah, met a man at the Wynn Hotel Casino. The pair subsequently went to a nearby hookah lounge where Jones allegedly insisted that the man have multiple drinks. He told police he didn't remember much from the night after that, and later woke up in the valet area of the Venetian Hotel Casino. For her spree of druggings and thefts, Jones faced 3 counts of felony grand larceny. The authorities indicated that Jones might have additional victims who were too embarrassed to come forward. Number 1. Timothy Fry. Early on December the 13th of 2014, a man was run over by a car in the parking lot outside Little Dallas Bar and Grill, north of Fairgrove in Dallas County, Missouri. The victim, identified as Corey Arthur, died at a Springfield hospital 15 days later. Eyewitnesses claimed that the individual who'd collided with Arthur had subsequently attempted to run someone else over before hitting a metal post with his SUV and speeding off. The vehicle was later found at an impound lot after it had been abandoned in the Roundtree neighborhood of Springfield, east of Missouri State University. In January of 2015, a search warrant enabled investigators to collect DNA samples from the SUV's steering wheel, driver's side door handle and light switch, as well as an energy drink container. The suspect was identified as 25-year-old Timothy Fry, a repeat offender. By that time, the man had already been incarcerated multiple times and was currently on parole for a 5-year prison sentence for burglary and endangering the welfare of a child. He was indicted on charges of second-degree murder, assault, and leaving the scene of an accident in connection with Arthur's death. Fry later pleaded guilty to manslaughter and was consequently sent back to prison for 15 years. Australian woman Natalie Bonnet was making her way through a COVID-19 blockade in Wallan on September the 12th of 2020 when she was involved in a violent altercation with the police. Subsequent reports revealed that the woman, a 29-year-old lash technician, was initially stopped at the checkpoint because she had a cell phone attached to a car charger mounted on her windshield, which law enforcement told her was illegal. A tense interaction ensued as Bonnet refused to give the policeman her name or driver's license, instead requesting to speak with a supervisor. The officer repeatedly asked the woman, who reportedly suffered from severe anxiety, to step out of the vehicle, but she refused, indicating she was uncomfortable and felt unsafe. As was captured in a video recording of the incident, the officer subsequently reached inside the vehicle and attempted to drag the masked woman outside, while her boyfriend, who was in the passenger seat, tried to pull her back in. Bonnet was eventually removed from the car by force. She later claimed in an interview with the Herald Sun that the officers were rough in their handling of her, as they allegedly kneed her in the back, constricting her airways and leaving her with several bruises in the aftermath. Bonnet roundly condemned the police's actions, which she labeled disproportionate to her behavior. Victoria Police placed the brunt of the blame for the incident on the motorist herself, whom they deemed childish and combative for repeatedly flouting law enforcement's instructions. She was charged with driving with obscured vision, failing to produce a license, failing to state her name and address, resisting arrest, assault of a police officer, and offensive language. Bonnet was involved in a second altercation with the police only 2 months later, when she lashed out at officers trying to detain her because she was in the midst of a panic attack. In court, it was detailed that the police were simply attempting to get her the medical help she required, but she resisted them and at one point threw a tire iron into the middle of the freeway, endangering other drivers. In February of 2023, Bonnet pleaded guilty to conduct endangering other persons and 2 counts of assaulting an emergency worker on duty. Number 6. Sprint store dispute. A contentious, racially charged exchange between patrons at a Sprint store in Manassas, Virginia, went viral in the summer of 2017. In a video of the incident that was widely shared on social media, a woman was shown on the phone telling a representative that she'd been to 2 of the 5 Sprint stores in Manassas, but no one had been able to help her. A polite-sounding man subsequently told the woman they have one in Fairfax, to which she immediately responded with anger and hostility. She berated the friendly bystander, saying, "I wasn't talking to you, and don't listen to my conversation." The man, who identified himself simply as Juan, refrained from engaging with her as she proceeded to shout profanity-laden insults at him. The interaction then seemingly came to an end, as a moment of silence between the 2 parties ensued. However, a few seconds later, the woman then lashed out at Juan again, telling him her husband, who was also inside the store, would beat him up if he continued bothering her. She also indicated that she'd be willing to fight him as well, calling him a racial slur in the process. Rather than inflame the tension any further, Juan subsequently left the store, but as he did, the woman hurled one final taunt, telling him to go back to Mexico as the video came to an end. She said, "So disrespectful, speaking another language in my country." The belligerent woman's behavior was met with nearly ubiquitous disapproval and condemnation, including by the CEO of Sprint himself, who called the incident totally unacceptable. Number 5. Charles J. Hagador. Ohio police were called to the Victoria Theater in downtown Dayton at about 5:30 p.m. on July the 9th of 2018 for a report of a man causing a public disturbance. Responding officers encountered 44-year-old Charles J. Hagador, whom theater employees accused of trashing their break room in an angry outburst. The man had reportedly gone to follow up on a job application he'd submitted. He immediately displayed signs of intoxication and appeared agitated when he was asked to fill out another application. While doing so, however, Hagadorn's handwriting was noticeably erratic, and the staff thus asked him to come back after he'd sobered up. The man then flew into a rage, shouting profanities and threatening to stab 3 employees. Hagadorn began throwing objects around the break room, prompting some of the workers to attempt to physically restrain him. He spat on them and scratched one of their arms with his fingernails. By the time law enforcement arrived, the employees had successfully subdued the man, and he was subsequently arrested. He was booked at the Montgomery County Jail on charges of assault and aggravated menacing. The police indicated that Hagadorn didn't smell of alcohol, but they agreed with the theater employee's assessment that he was under the influence of something. Number 4. Matthew James Visconti. Following a long night of drinking, Florida man Matthew James Visconti punched a Jimmy John's employee on May the 2nd of 2015. The 22-year-old Boca Raton resident was at the sandwich shop at 330 Clematis Street. When the incident occurred, police were called to the scene where they encountered Visconti, who appeared agitated, aggressive, and was noticeably intoxicated. He complained that he hadn't received the sandwich he'd paid for in a timely manner, which had prompted him to strike the store manager in the face. The latter presented with a visible laceration on the bridge of his nose. While law enforcement was gathering information about what had transpired, Visconti reportedly exited the restaurant and started walking east on Clematis Street. Officers informed him he needed to remain at the scene, but he refused, at which point a physical struggle between him and the police ensued. The young man was accused of elbowing and kicking 2 officers before being cuffed. A police report detailed that at one point, Visconti wedged himself in between a pair of palm trees and then needed to have his legs restrained after he continued to kick at law enforcement. He was initially taken to a local hospital for the facial abrasions he sustained during his fight with the police, before being booked at the Palm Beach County Jail on a $6,000 bond. Visconti consequently faced criminal charges of battery on an officer, disorderly intoxication, and resisting arrest. Number 3. Cody Lee Fister. 26-year-old Cody Lee Fister was arrested after a video of him licking items at a Walmart in Warrenton, Missouri, surfaced on social media. Local police were made aware of the man's shameless attempt to mock concerns about the coronavirus after multiple Warrenton residents made calls to report the video, which Fister himself had uploaded. In the recording, the young man could be heard asking, "Who's scared of coronavirus?" as he continually dragged his tongue across various store items. The prank video ultimately landed him in police custody on a charge of making threats. In official court documents, Fister was accused of knowingly causing a false belief or fear that a condition involving danger to life existed. His attorney told a local media outlet that the incident occurred the day before the World Health Organization officially classified COVID-19 as a pandemic, and that public conduct that was immature looks completely different through the lens of today. Number 2. Liam Watts. A pair of English police departments withstood targeted cyber attacks that caused their websites to go down in August of 2018 and March of 2019. According to court records, both the Greater Manchester Police Force and the Cheshire Constabulary had their respective sites hacked by a 20-year-old cybercriminal named Liam Watts. As a result of the latter's attacks, the websites were rendered inaccessible, meaning civilians were unable to view vital information, seek updates on the progress of ongoing investigations, report minor crimes, or contact local officers for a 24-hour period. Watts reportedly used specialist software to overload the websites, then posted messages on social media in which he boasted about his achievements and taunted the police for their inability to stop him. In one such post, Watts indicated his cyber attacks were meant as retaliation for his previous conviction in connection to a bomb hoax in Warrenton. Law enforcement officials called the young man immature for the website hack and social media taunts. He was eventually arrested and later pleaded guilty to 2 counts of unauthorized acts with intent to impair the operation of or prevent access to a computer. During a hearing at Chester Crown Court in August of 2019, Watts was sentenced to 16 months detention for what a judge described as a fundamental attack on the heart of society. Number 1. Matthew Nicholson. A 28-year-old man from Ceres, California, gunned his mother down following an argument over a broken video game headset on January the 11th of 2018. An investigation into the matter revealed that on the night in question, Matthew Nicholson had started yelling while playing video games in his room at the home he shared with his parents on the 1300 block of River Valley Circle. After hearing the commotion he was making, his mother, 68-year-old Lydia Nicholson, checked in on him, which only served to further enrage him. They got into an argument during the course of which Matthew's headset broke under circumstances that weren't disclosed in subsequent reports. The man blamed his mother for the device's malfunction, at which point he threatened to kill both her and his father. He then retrieved a handgun, which he used to shoot Lydia in the head, a wound that ultimately proved fatal for her. Matthew's father subsequently wrestled the weapon away from him, and Matthew fled the scene by car, driving to a relative's house in Riverbank. The police eventually tracked him down and took him into custody for his mother's killing. In April of 2021, it was reported that Matthew had reached a deal with prosecutors, the terms of which stipulated that he would plead guilty to second-degree murder and assault with a firearm. He was consequently given a prison term of 27 years to life. In March of 2017, a botched home invasion in Broken Arrow, Oklahoma left 3 people dead and 21-year-old Elizabeth Marie Rodriguez in police custody. The latter had reportedly conspired with 3 teenage accomplices to carry out a home burglary on the day in question. While Rodriguez served as the getaway driver, the other 3 were tasked with breaking into the home, which they did on the morning of March the 24th, before making off with speakers they found in the garage. Rodriguez would later tell investigators that they were greedy and thus decided to return to the same house later that night. Dressed in all black, the teen trio forced their way into the residence through the back door, but this time they were met by the homeowner's son, 23-year-old Zachary Peters, who was awakened by the sound of loud bangs in the house. He grabbed his father's rifle and crept down to the kitchen, where he encountered the 3 intruders and opened fire. Peters subsequently called 911, and when the police showed up a short time later, they found the thieves identified as Maxwell Cook, Jacob Redfern, and Jacob Woodruff, all dead from the gunshot wounds they'd sustained. Rodriguez was arrested for devising the plan for the home invasion as well as for her role as the driver. In a jailhouse interview with local media, the young woman admitted that she knew the burglaries were wrong and stupid and didn't begrudge Peters' actions either, saying, "I don't blame him. I understand why he did what he did." In the wake of her co-conspirators' deaths, Rodriguez not only faced burglary charges but also 3 counts of first-degree murder. She agreed to a plea deal which reduced the charge to second-degree murder. In October of 2018, she was given 45-year prison sentences for each count, which were ordered to run simultaneously. Number 5. Eric Eugene Washington. Shortly before 11:30 p.m. on January the 5th of 2023, an armed robber entered Ranchitos Taqueria in Houston, Texas, demanding money from customers. As the masked man was leaving, however, one of the patrons pulled out a gun and fatally shot him. When police subsequently arrived and launched an investigation, detectives relied heavily on the restaurant's surveillance cameras, which had captured the incident in its entirety. The shooter, who wished to remain anonymous, reportedly collected the stolen money from the incapacitated robber, then returned it to the other customers before leaving the scene. After speaking with the 46-year-old, the police decided not to arrest or charge him. A few days later, the armed patron's attorney released a statement on his behalf detailing the personal anguish he'd experienced following the shooting, which he said would burden him for the rest of his life. Despite his emotional turmoil, he also expressed his belief that his actions were justified and that a grand jury would choose not to indict him in connection to the deadly incident. While many thought of the armed diner as a good Samaritan who thwarted a crime in progress, others didn't view him in such a reverent light. There were some who thought he should in fact be charged with murder because after shooting the suspect, 30-year-old Eric Eugene Washington, 4 times in the back, the diner walked over to Washington on the ground and fired an additional 5 rounds, including one in the back of his head. It was also determined that Washington had actually been armed with a fake gun during the robbery. As of the latest developments, the legal proceedings were at a standstill until a grand jury could review the case and decide on the shooter's fate. Number 4. Justin Martin. On New Year's Eve in 2011, teen mom Sarah McKinley heard someone banging on the front door of her home in Blanchard, Oklahoma. While it wasn't customary for people in the rural community to lock their doors, 18-year-old McKinley had grown concerned that someone was breaking in to steal her late husband's prescription medication. As was divulged in court documents, McKinley's 58-year-old husband, Kenneth, had passed away on Christmas Day following a bout with lung cancer. In the days that followed, she started noticing that some of his pills had gone missing. The pain meds, it would later emerge, were being swiped by 24-year-old Justin Martin, who was the individual banging on McKinley's door in the middle of the afternoon on New Year's Eve. The man was reportedly armed with a 12-inch hunting knife, prompting McKinley to immediately dial 911. The rural sections of Grady County, such as Blanchard, are only patrolled by 3 sheriff's deputies at a time, according to subsequent reports. Due to the dearth of on-duty officers, as well as the fact that McKinley's home sat on the edge of town. It took law enforcement 21 minutes to get to the scene after her initial 911 call. By that time, the young woman had already gunned Martin down after he'd forced his way inside the home. Following the resulting police investigation, the authorities declined to file charges against McKinley for protecting her home and 3-year-old son from an armed intruder. Charges were ultimately filed against a man named Dustin Stewart, who was described as Martin's accomplice. He told detectives that Martin had developed a dependency on prescription drugs and that he'd targeted McKinley's residence after the death of her husband, whom he'd known. As part of a plea deal with prosecutors, Stewart pleaded no contest to a burglary charge in the summer of 2014 and was consequently given a suspended 10-year prison sentence. Number 3. Ricky Martinez. In 2019, a silent alarm during the early hours of Christmas morning alerted the police in San Jose, California, to a crime in progress in the 1200 block of East Santa Clara Street. Upon arrival, law enforcement found 31-year-old Ricky Martinez lying in the middle of the road in critical condition. He was taken to the hospital where he was officially pronounced dead. Investigators soon learned that leading up to his death, Martinez had been involved in a domestic dispute with his girlfriend, 22-year-old Sabrina Marie Gutierrez. Police records detailed how at about 2:15 a.m., Gutierrez had called her family to the home following a contentious confrontation with Martinez. The young woman's brother and mother arrived a short time later, at which point the argument escalated to the point of violence. Martinez allegedly pulled out a firearm and shot his girlfriend's brother. In a fit of rage, Gutierrez got behind the wheel of her vehicle, mounted the sidewalk, and ran her boyfriend over, inflicting the injuries that ultimately claimed his life. In the wake of the deadly hit and run, the police began hunting for Gutierrez. Her car was found later on Christmas Day. It had been set on fire and abandoned at the corner of Feldspar Avenue and Arctic Street. The young woman herself was also eventually tracked down and taken into custody, whereupon she was held without bond on a murder charge. Number 2. NES Morera. Dramatic surveillance footage in which a gunman tried to rob families outside a Brazilian school surfaced online on May the 12th of 2018. The armed individual, 21-year-old NES Morera, showed up at Colegio Ferreira Master School in Sao Paulo and pointed a firearm at a group of mothers waiting outside for the children. Just as suddenly as Morera had emerged, a woman drew her own weapon and fired several rounds, sending him to the pavement. As he fell, the man discharged 2 bullets, one that ricocheted off the ground hitting nobody and another that jammed in his firearm. The woman then kicked his gun away and held him at gunpoint until the arrival of law enforcement. Morera was subsequently taken to the hospital where he succumbed to his injuries. In the incident's aftermath, it was revealed that the armed woman who'd foiled the man's robbery attempt was actually an off-duty military police officer by the name of Katia da Silva Sastre, aged 42. At the time of the shooting, Sastre had reportedly been on her way to a Mother's Day party at the school with her 7-year-old daughter. Sastre, a 20-year police veteran and mother of 2, was widely commended for her valiant actions, including during a formal ceremony at her police station, which was attended by the governor of Sao Paulo. Number 1. Coral Edgar. An English model set a honey trap for her drug-dealing ex-boyfriend, then unleashed a barbaric attack on him on July the 24th of 2020. It was revealed in court that 26-year-old Coral Edgar sent her former partner, Lee McKnight, intimate messages via Snapchat to lure him to her home in Carlisle, Cumbria. Upon his arrival, however, McKnight, also 26 at the time, was subject to brutal torture at the hands of Aaron Graham and Jamie Lee Roberts. The latter 2 were described as extra muscle, recruited by Jamie Davison to carry out the attack. Davison was identified as a middleman in an alleged £500,000 a year drug-dealing operation with which McKnight was also involved. The victim allegedly owed Davison thousands of pounds in unpaid drug debts, so Edgar was enlisted to set the trap in order to make an example of him. Graham and Roberts tied McKnight to a chair and beat him to the brink of death. Then, while he was still clinging to life, McKnight's assailants tossed him into a river south of Carlisle, where he drowned. A few hours later, his body was discovered by a nearby farmer who contacted the authorities. The autopsy revealed the presence of 36 separate wounds on the victim's head, as well as a broken skull and multiple fractured ribs. It was also determined that McKnight had been whipped with a riding crop belonging to Edgar's mother, who'd purchased it at an adult toy shop. The ensuing homicide investigation led to the arrest and prosecution of 6 suspects. Edgar for setting the deadly trap, Graham and Roberts for inflicting the physical abuse and dumping McKnight's body in the river, the latter's father for destroying evidence, Edgar's mother for allowing the killers to use her car during the commission of the crime, and Davison for orchestrating the entire revenge plot. Each of the defendants was ultimately jailed for life, with varying minimum terms. Edgar was ordered to serve at least 13.5 years before she could be considered for early release, while Davison would need to spend at least 30 years behind bars, which was the most severe punishment handed down by the judge. While outside a movie theater in Newark, New Jersey, Torquay Boyd stumbled upon an unoccupied police SUV in May of 2019. In a live-streamed incident, the 22-year-old proceeded to urinate on the cop car while a crowd cheered him on. Predictably, the footage was sent to the authorities and Boyd was arrested within 24 hours at his West Orange home. He was charged with lewdness, criminal mischief, and disorderly conduct. Newark Police Public Safety Director Anthony Ambrose released a statement condemning the disrespectful act as a personal insult to the police and an act that was detrimental towards law enforcement's efforts of improving the quality of life in the city. While it was definitely his most publicized, the incident wasn't Boyd's first criminal act towards a police vehicle. In October of the previous year, he was arrested and charged with burglarizing a cruiser parked outside the Hoboken Police Department. He and an accomplice had rummaged through the vehicle, unzipping a Narcan kit and throwing 2 summons books on the ground. The status of that case remained unclear as of Boyd's latest arrest. Speaking of the latter incident, Ambrose described the public's initiative of informing the police of the video's existence as a sign of mutual respect. Number 7. Ashley Keast. In September of 2013, Englishman Ashley Keast and an accomplice broke into a property in Rotherham, South Yorkshire, while the owners were on holiday. They made off with various valuables that included jewelry, electronics, and an Audi A4. Keast also stole a SIM card from the home, inserted it into another phone, and took a selfie, which he posted on WhatsApp. He accidentally sent the photo to the victim's work colleagues, who became suspicious and notified law enforcement. The police consequently raided 23-year-old Keast's home and, hidden behind a radiator, found a stolen Rolex watch worth nearly $5,000. In March of the following year, Keast was jailed for 2 years and 8 months after he admitted burglary at Sheffield Crown Court. His accomplice, 27-year-old Anthony Hunt, also pleaded guilty and was given an 18-month sentence. The burglary victim felt that justice had been served, according to investigators assigned to the case. However, Keast later reverted to his poor decision-making and arranged for a threatening letter to be sent to the victim. It resulted in him being charged and ultimately found guilty of making threats to kill, witness intimidation, and attempting to pervert the course of justice. As a result, 4 more years were added on top of his original sentence. Number 6. Robert Hobby and Marcus Reeves. 2 petty thieves in Central Florida went on a stealing spree in and around Ocala in the fall of 2020 and were eventually captured following a series of critical mistakes they'd made during their criminal activity. As reported by the Marion County Sheriff's Office, 41-year-old Robert Hobby and Marcus Reeves, aged 23, stole cigarettes and lottery tickets from several convenience stores. They were caught on CCTV smoking at the scene of their crimes, but ultimately, the police didn't even need the footage to identify them. After breaking into one store, the thieves left their tools behind, and Reeves forgot his wallet, which contained his driver's license. Officers went to arrest the man at his home, whereupon he confessed and reportedly gave up his partner as well. They were taken to Marion County Jail and each held on a $56,000 bond on a combined total of 14 theft and burglary charges. Number 5. Leesa Brisbane. In November of 2015, law enforcement in Pinellas County, Florida, arrested 21-year-old Charmaine Arnold after she'd skipped out on a cab fare of about $60. However, Arnold also had an outstanding warrant for a felony battery case in Miami-Dade County, which resulted in her bond being set at $7,500. Arnold would spend about a week in custody before her friend, 46-year-old Leesa Brisbane, made several payments for her with a Clearwater Bail Bonds Company. The transactions totaled $850, but it would soon emerge that the Visa card used by Brisbane had been stolen and was in the name of an elderly male victim. Brisbane signed several documents and sales receipts, in addition to allowing the company to make photocopies of her driver's license. The paperwork thus became evidence and allowed for an easy arrest of Brisbane, who was charged with grand theft and credit card fraud, both felonies. The woman, who also went by the alias Lakeisha Best, was a convicted felon who'd been released in early 2010. She'd been held for 15 months in a state prison after she was convicted on various fraud charges. Number 4. Richard Almaroy. British serial burglar Richard Almaroy was jailed for 5 years in January of 2013 at Norwich Crown Court after stealing a laptop while he was wearing an electronic tag. At the time of his latest offense, 33-year-old Almaroy was serving a suspended sentence for a previous burglary. In spite of law enforcement tracking his movements, the Norfolk man broke into a Norwich apartment and made off with the computer. Drug addiction was reported as a factor in his inability to realize the ramifications of his actions. The anti-crime device with which he'd been fitted enabled officers to easily trace his whereabouts, and they recovered the missing laptop from the repeat offender's home. Almaroy was taken into custody and admitted the burglary, asking for 5 similar offenses to be considered. After he was handed his sentence, Almaroy was warned by the presiding judge that his sentences would only get longer if he continued to offend. The judge also commented on the man's issues with substance abuse, stating, "The only person that can stop you taking drugs is you." Number 3. Andrew Kellett. Leading up to the spring of 2008, Andrew Kellett from Leeds, England, posted dozens of videos on his YouTube channel that showed him and others engaging in a wide array of criminal activities. 23-year-old Kellett's excessive boasting led to him being dubbed the country's dumbest criminal, as he'd provided the authorities with abundant evidence to arrest and convict him for various offenses that included him leaving a gas station without paying, taking Class A drugs, racing and driving at high speeds, trespassing or shouting abuse at passers-by. Kellett persisted in documenting his illicit exploits in spite of the legal consequences, and even recorded himself receiving a suspended sentence at Leeds Magistrates Court. The situation escalated to the point that the same court handed Kellett, who called himself Mr. Chimp online, an interim antisocial behavior order, or ASBO, in May of 2008. It prohibited him from posting images, videos, or descriptions of unlawful activities. He was also banned from driving or encouraging others to drive in what would be deemed as a dangerous or antisocial manner. Any breach of the temporary order could have resulted in Kellett being jailed. Most of his videos were removed leading up to and after the decision. Kellett opposed the order, claiming that it violated his human rights by limiting his ability to freely express himself. Updates on the matter indicated that the interim ASBO had been made into a full order. In July of 2008, Kellett stated in the aftermath that he was just an entertainer, adding, "I'm not Britain's dumbest criminal, I'm just misunderstood." Number 2. Jason Dante Hayes. In 2016, Pennsylvania teenager Jason Dante Hayes was characterized by the Nether Providence Township Police Chief as one of the dumbest criminals he'd ever encountered, following a fumbled robbery. In early January, on the 3rd of the month at around 3 a.m., Hayes entered an elderly couple's home via an unlocked kitchen window on the first floor. While the unnamed victim's husband was still sleeping in a separate bedroom, Hayes woke her up by tapping her on the shoulder with his handgun and demanded cash. The woman, reported as being in her 70s, told him that there wasn't any money in the house, so Hayes forced her to drive to an ATM. He ordered the victim to take out $2,000, threatening to kill her and her husband if she didn't cooperate. The ATM, however, only allowed for the withdrawal of $460. Hayes hatched a plan but didn't think it through, as subsequent events would confirm. He took the couple into the kitchen, where he reportedly spoke to them for about an hour before leaving their home. Hayes told the woman to meet him at a shopping center parking lot the following day and bring more money lest he'd return and kill them both. When the victim asked how she'd recognize him, the teenage robber claimed that he'd be wearing the same clothes, which consisted of black and white camouflage pants and a dark scarf around his face. In spite of Hayes' threats, the couple went to the authorities on the afternoon of January the 3rd. Nether Providence Police Chief David Splain expressed doubts that a robber would actually show up for a scheduled appointment, but nevertheless decided to post plainclothes officers at the rendezvous spot. Hayes defied logical expectations and made his way to the parking lot, wearing the outfit described by the victims. He waited for a few minutes before officers moved in to arrest him. They found $360 in cash and a gold Timex watch, which he'd stolen from the couple, in his possession. Hayes was taken to Delaware County Prison and charged with kidnapping, robbery, and aggravated assault. Even though the incident had occurred in January, Splain told a media outlet that Hayes would definitely win the Dumbest Criminal of the Year on December 31st. Number 1. Janiyah Shy Miracle Douglas. On the morning of May the 12th of 2022, a law enforcement officer from the Monroe County Sheriff's Office in Florida initiated a pursuit on a speeding Toyota sedan on Card Sound Road in Key Largo. 19-year-old Janiyah Shy Miracle Douglas continued driving recklessly in spite of Sergeant Robert Dosh signaling her to pull over by activating the cruiser's lights and sirens. She eventually stopped at a three-way intersection near County Road 905. Douglas was taken into custody on charges of fleeing and eluding. After she was apprehended, the teenager surprised Dosh by stating that getting arrested had been on her bucket list since high school. Douglas, who lived in Homestead and worked as a housekeeper, faced a license suspension of anywhere between 1 and 5 years. Florida woman Rashia Wilson, who scammed the IRS out of millions of dollars, openly bragged about being invincible on Facebook after being sentenced to a 21-year prison sentence for wire fraud, aggravated identity theft, and firearm possession. In 2015, the 35-year-old woman reportedly stole the personal information of thousands of unidentified victims, using their data to submit fake tax returns and fraudulently receiving millions of dollars from the U.S. government. Wilson boasted about her crimes online, calling herself the First Lady and Queen of IRS tax fraud. She and a co-conspirator named as Morris J. Larry were said to have orchestrated their scheme from at least April of 2009 through September of 2012. The woman had her initial 21-year sentence thrown out in January of 2015 after an appeals court judge ruled that procedural errors had led to her receiving an unduly harsh punishment. However, in March, Wilson was resentenced to 21 years yet again. An online petition for the convicted swindler's release was set up in the aftermath of her incarceration, calling her punishment unlawful and an example of racial disparities in federal criminal sentences. Number 8. Derek Aldred. On June the 1st of 2017, Texas man Derek Aldred, aged 46, was arrested for scamming women he met on dating sites. The man had multiple aliases he used in order to seduce his victims, including Rich Taylor and Richard Peterson. A warrant for his arrest had been issued in December of 2016. However, he managed to evade capture while using new profiles to continue his scams. At various points, pretending to be a doctor, a lawyer, and a military man. Most of the women he targeted lived in Minnesota, California, and Arizona. Aldred used different pictures he'd stolen from unsuspecting men's social media accounts to conceal his true identity. One of his victims, identified only as Linda, told the police that Aldred had pretended to be a reservist in the Navy who was going after a PhD in political science. He even managed to acquire a military uniform, as well as a Purple Heart and Silver Star, all of which he asked Linda to keep at her residence. Aldred reportedly stole Linda's entire life savings, which amounted to over $200,000 before she uncovered his lies. Before his 2017 arrest, Aldred had already been convicted of over 10 felonies. In August of 2018, he was sentenced to 24 years behind bars after pleading guilty to several counts of mail fraud and identity theft. Number 7. Jamie Petroni Codrington. 42-year-old Jamie Petroni Codrington, an administrator at the Yale School of Medicine, was sentenced to 9 years in prison for fraud and tax evasion on October the 13th of 2022. Earlier that year, the Connecticut woman had pleaded guilty to stealing over $40 million in electronics from the Department of Emergency Medicine over the course of nearly a decade. By reaching an agreement with prosecutors, she avoided facing a possible sentence of 23 years behind bars on more serious charges. Petroni Codrington admitted to selling the computers and other high-end electronic items, the proceeds of which she then used to purchase 4 houses, a $5,000 Louis Vuitton bag, as well as half a dozen cars for her family. Number 6. Renan Augusto Gomez, a scam artist known as the Brazilian Tinder swindler, was arrested on September the 21st of 2022 after crashing his car at the conclusion of a police chase. The 36-year-old man was given his nickname by several media outlets following the release of the Netflix documentary The Tinder Swindler, centered on the eponymous Simon Leviv's crimes. Gomez seduced at least 7 women on dating sites such as Tinder, Happen, and Lovo, using fake sob stories to convince them to help him financially. He didn't use his real name, instead identifying himself as Augusto Keller. The man reportedly targeted women aged between 34 and 40 with high-paying jobs and who were looking for love. Gomez even met the families of some of the women he ended up swindling. In several cases, he offered his romantic interests the opportunity to invest in a purported business venture, but once the women wired him the money, he would move on to his next target. Police believe there have been many other victims who hadn't come forward at the time of his arrest and urged the public to contact the authorities if they had any further information regarding Gomez's criminal activity. Number 5. Simon Leviv. Between 2017 and 2019, Simon Leviv, a man in his early 30s, scammed over $10 million from dozens of victims all across Europe. Born in Israel, he emigrated to several different countries in the European Union while orchestrating his romance scams, tricking women he met through Tinder into dumping their money into his Ponzi schemes. The man's crimes became public after an article describing his modus operandi was published in a Norwegian tabloid and later exposed in a Netflix documentary. Leviv, the so-called Tinder swindler, left Israel after spending time in prison for fraud. He changed his name to avoid questions about his past, a method he would use several more times prior to his eventual arrest. He met women through Tinder, seducing them by flashing an extravagant lifestyle, which was bankrolled by the funds he'd stolen from previous victims. Once he gained their trust, Leviv would ask for more and more money from the women he scammed, before disappearing and moving on to his next target. In 2019, Leviv was arrested by Interpol for using a forged passport and spent 5 months in an Israeli prison. He was released early due to pandemic-related safety measures. The man adamantly denied the accusations of his alleged victims. Since the Netflix documentary was released, he's been attempting to profit from the resulting media attention. Leviv reportedly hired a talent manager and created a Cameo account, charging between $200 and $2,000 for personalized videos. Number 4. Desiree Boltos and Paul Hill. Between 2012 and 2017, Texas couple Desiree Boltos and Paul Hill posed as siblings in order to scam at least 6 men out of more than $3 million. The first confirmed victim was Danny Barnett, aged 72, who met then 32-year-old Boltos at a post office. Back in 2012, she told Barnett that she was a widow, and after a brief romance ensued. She claimed that she had cancer and couldn't afford the requisite treatment. They married 4 months after their initial meeting so that Boltos could have access to her new husband's insurance. Over the next few months, Barnett bought his new bride a car and a house, although they didn't live together. Boltos introduced him to her purported brother, Paul Hill, who was in reality the father of her children and common-law husband. During the years that followed, Boltos repeated the scam with several other men, all over the age of 65, pretending to need money for medical or legal issues, or requesting her partners to invest in her brother's business. Among those victimized by the pernicious scheme was James Olmsted, a retired military man, Paul Wilbur, Richard Lima, Lois Cardan, and Douglas Wingo, a veteran suffering from dementia. It was Wingo's sister, Patty Hamilton, who became suspicious after discovering that Boltos had obtained multiple credit cards in her brother's name. Boltos and Hill were ultimately taken into custody, and in November of 2018, the former was sentenced to 85 years in prison. She was also ordered to pay restitution to her victims. 2 years later, Hill was found guilty of money laundering, theft, and organized criminal activity, for which he was sentenced to 125 years. After appealing the decision and requesting to serve his time concurrently, the man's prison term was reduced to 85 years. Number 3. Kelly Bryan. Actress and singer Kelly Bryan, known for her roles in Hollyoaks and Loose Women, opened up about being the victim of a love scam in the hopes of helping other women notice the warning signs. In February of 2022, during an episode of Loose Women, a talk show she co-hosts, Bryan explained that she was manipulated into a coercive relationship by a man she refrained from mentioning by name. She detailed how her partner had isolated her from family and friends and had gained control of every aspect of her life before she managed to break free from his manipulative behavior. Bryan only caught on to her partner's lies after she received a call from her bank and discovered several large transactions had been made without her authorization. She'd apparently been so embarrassed about being conned that she didn't make any attempts to recover the stolen money or contact the authorities. Although Bryan didn't tell her co-host exactly how much money she'd been swindled out of, she did say that the scammer had purchased high-end cars and other expensive luxury items with the ill-gotten funds. Number 2. Wilson Jackson. Wilson Jackson, a 37-year-old resident of Woodland Hills, California, was arrested on May the 23rd of 2019 for posing as a millionaire on dating sites in order to swindle money from unsuspecting women. Many of his victims didn't live locally. Instead, Jackson would make his dates fly from out of state, with promises of reimbursing them for their various travel expenses. Following their rendezvous, the man would wait until the women fell asleep before going through their wallets. Then, Jackson stole their identities using their credit and debit card information to buy fancy clothes, pay bills, and even purchase gifts and lavish vacations for other victims. He was thus able to maintain the illusion that he had seemingly never-ending funds and convinced women to give him loans by fabricating situations in which he couldn't readily access his money. It's not known precisely when Jackson started his predatory schemes, but by 2011, Orlando police had become well aware of his crimes, considering him a person of interest in several cases of credit card fraud. One of his victims, Acacia Udinot, an Air Force veteran, told police that he'd purchased a plane ticket for her to visit him in California, but after it turned out to be fake, he claimed to have been scammed and requested that she buy a new one with her own funds, promising to reimburse her later. When she returned home, Udinot realized that Jackson was not only ignoring her texts and calls, but that he'd stolen her credit card information to make more than $7,000 worth of purchases. The serial dating scammer faced 33 felony charges to which he pleaded not guilty during a preliminary court hearing. Number 1. Ruben Sarpong. On May the 3rd of 2022, New Jersey man Ruben Sarpong was sentenced to 14 years behind bars for money laundering, wire fraud, and tax evasion in connection to a romance scam he'd orchestrated. Along with several co-conspirators, most of whom resided in Ghana, the 38-year-old defrauded over $2 million from at least 40 victims. The group posed online as military men looking for love. When they zeroed in on a target, they claimed that they were stuck overseas and needed money in order to release gold bars or other goods that the Syrian government had seized. Cash, money orders, and checks were transferred to different bank accounts linked to Sarpong. who would continually fabricate new complications that precluded him from resolving his supposed predicament. Sarpong pleaded guilty to all counts in order to avoid a harsher sentence, agreeing to pay restitution to 36 victims as well as over $380,000 to the IRS. It was reported that because most of the man's accomplices weren't from the US, it's unlikely they'd be prosecuted for their crimes. Las Vegas law enforcement pulled over a Toyota Tundra on December the 23rd of 2021 after finding, through a license check, that its registration was suspended. The truck was later determined to have been stolen. The driver, who was subsequently identified as 57-year-old Eric Holland, initially stopped but then drove off. Officers followed him for about 3 miles until he pulled into a parking garage near the Rio Hotel and Casino. Holland emerged in another stolen truck, a Chevrolet Avalanche. The police realized that the vehicle was driven by the same suspect and pursued it for a few miles before Holland pulled over near the Orleans Casino. He disregarded officers' commands upon exiting the vehicle and tried to flee on foot, but was subdued with a taser. Law enforcement checked the vehicle and detected a foul odor coming from inside. They found a severed human head in a trash bag, as well as a torso and 2 legs in large coolers in the back. Following Holland's arrest on suspicion of murder, he initially tried to claim that the human remains were already inside the truck when he'd stolen it and that he hadn't known about them. However, the victim was identified as 65-year-old Richard Miller, a friend of his who'd been reported missing for about a month. He'd died from multiple gunshot wounds, one of which was to the head. Holland eventually admitted that he'd killed Miller but didn't elaborate on the motive beyond saying that they'd had an argument while both of them were armed. Holland claimed he tried to do right by him and bury Miller, but it was too difficult to move him as he stood at 6'4" and weighed 250 pounds. And so he decided to dismember his body. He was sentenced to a minimum of 18 and a maximum of 45 years in prison for second-degree murder and felony theft. Number 6. Melissa Bergman. Over a 2-day period in late July of 2018, Ohio woman Melissa Bergman stole multiple packages from her neighbor's doorsteps during what she'd later describe as a mental breakdown. At least one of the thefts was caught on surveillance video. The prolific porch pirate drove through her neighborhood and reportedly made off with 28 packages, but was ultimately convicted on 12 counts of theft. Bergman was sentenced to 180 days in Warren County Jail, but the remainder of her time was suspended after 30 days, and she'd remain on probation for 3 years following her release. While she was generally viewed as a bored suburban housewife, the 30-year-old claimed that her mental health had been severely affected by problems in her marriage and PTSD from her time in the military. Several months after the thefts, she told forensic psychologists interviewing her that God had told her to take the packages and give them to others. The judge presiding over her case was skeptical, noting that she hadn't done as purportedly commanded, but instead opened the items, threw away the packaging, and distributed their contents around her home. Bergman claimed that her husband, from whom she eventually separated, was very controlling and only wanted her to stay home and care for their 2 children. She pointed to the pressure of her failing marriage and the medication she'd taken for her severe PTSD as factors in the spree. Bergman reported that she'd been abused multiple times by different men during her time in the army, which included serving in Afghanistan from 2006 to 2008. The army didn't comment on the allegations. Number 5. Rokisha Lachey Brisbane. From November of 2020 to March of 2022, a Texas woman was involved in a $3.3 million financial scheme while running a business that purported to help clients raise their credit score. 29-year-old Rokisha Lachey Brisbane operated Rose Credit Repair in North Harris County, which claimed it would use the law to find common errors and improve credit scores by 50 to 100 points within 35 days or less. Law enforcement eventually learned that Brisbane had fraudulently used dozens of items of identification, such as her client's ID, social security numbers, names, or dates of birth. She filed roughly 133 false reports that appeared to be coming from the police about the loss or theft of credit cards, even though most of her clients had never authorized her to do so. Brisbane was reported to have obtained the original police report from a woman named Valerie Cobio and then copied it multiple times. She failed to reduce Cobio's credit, but the scam did temporarily work out for several of her other clients, as financial institutions would honor the police reports and reverse their credit. Brisbane's operation unraveled when one of the banks contacted law enforcement and the discrepancies emerged. Officers raided Rose Credit Repair on July the 7th of 2022 and arrested Brisbane on charges of forgery and fraudulent use of personal information. She faced anywhere from 5 to 99 years in prison. Number 4. Incident in Texcoco. A would-be mugger paid a heavy toll in late July of 2020 after he'd targeted a bus in Texcoco, Mexico. 2 thieves were caught by the vehicle surveillance camera attempting to enter while it was stopped at a station. The driver sped off upon hearing the commotion. One of the men, who was believed to have been armed, wasn't able to get on the bus while his partner had made it inside, demanding money and grabbing a cell phone belonging to one of the 6 male passengers. The thief then rushed for the open door but quickly realized the bus was already in motion. A man near the door grabbed his arm and stopped him from getting out. The thief turned around and tried to punch him, at which point he was charged by all the passengers aboard and dragged to the ground. The men relentlessly punched and kicked him for an extended period of time as he begged for mercy. As the brutal beatdown was unfolding, the driver continued on his route. He'd tried stopping the vehicle, presumably so that the men could throw the thief out, but they prevented him from leaving. They continued to curse, stomp, and strike him, ripping his tank top off in the process. The bus eventually reached a stop in the municipality of Los Reyes de la Paz. What followed was captured by a vehicle following the bus. 3 men dragged the thief out, one of whom soccer kicked him in the head, briefly rendering him unconscious. Before they left the scene, another pulled the thief's pants off, leaving him naked in the street and barely moving from the multitude of strikes he'd sustained. It wasn't clear if the incident was reported to the police, but footage of it went viral. Number 3. Stephanie Baudoin. In 2014, Stephanie Baudoin was arrested for leading a gang of youths that broke into multiple homes in Quebec, Canada. Within the span of several months, her crew burglarized over 40 houses and made off with items totaling an estimated $58,000. Baudoin, who was then in her early 20s, was arrested after her white Mitsubishi Lancer with custom pink rims had been spotted at multiple crime scenes. As soon as she was taken into custody, the former nursing student asked for permission to delete her Facebook, fearing that her photos would incriminate her, but was denied. It ultimately worked in her favor, as Baudoin would subsequently become internationally known as the world's most attractive thief. She'd done some calendar modeling prior to her arrest, but when news of her crime spree broke, her online photos went viral. While stealing had gone wrong for her in terms of her criminal record and legal punishment, it also proved a launching pad for her modeling career. As she received multiple contract offers, she was eventually recruited by B Models Management in 2015. Early the following year, Baudoin was sentenced to 90 days in jail, which she only had to serve on weekends for the burglary spree. A judge allowed her to pursue the opportunities that came with her newfound fame, but forbade her from using her past as a thief to promote herself as a model. Baudoin told a media outlet that she couldn't advertise a product as Stephanie the Criminal and described the ruling as a pretty okay condition. Number 2. Wesley Sousa de Araujo. Brazilian thief Wesley Sousa de Araujo and an accomplice approached 2 women in Acalandia in the country's west. They cornered them on a motorbike and demanded they hand over their cell phones. One of the victims was professional MMA fighter and advanced Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu practitioner Monique Bastos, who at the time had 6 fights on her record. After one of the thieves had grabbed her phone, 23-year-old Bastos realized that they weren't armed, so she knocked down their motorbike. She'd later tell a media outlet, "I wasn't afraid, I knew I could immobilize them." His accomplice fled, but Araujo, the driver, didn't get a chance to escape as Bastos took him down. She then placed him in a rear naked choke before transitioning to a triangle choke, which involved trapping his head and arm with her legs. An onlooker recorded the incident on their phone. As Bastos applied pressure to his neck, Araujo started crying, asking for his mum and daddy, while also pleading with people to call the police. He exclaimed, "Help, Jesus, I swear it was the first time I've ever done this. Help, Lord, somebody help me." Bastos held Araujo in the lock for roughly 20 minutes until the police arrived to take him into custody. While at the local police station, he reportedly denied trying to rob the women. Number 1. R. Papa Rao. A video out of India went viral in the spring of 2022 of a thief who'd gotten stuck while trying to escape a temple he'd burglarized in Jadimudi village, Andhra Pradesh. The suspect, who was named as 30-year-old R. Papa Rao, was reported to have drilled a hole into the Jami Elama temple wall in order to steal the silver ornaments inside. Rao's actions were reportedly fueled by his alcohol addiction. He got trapped halfway in the opening on the way out and started pleading with bystanders to free him. They instead filmed the thief as he desperately tried to wiggle out and alerted the authorities. When officers arrived at the scene, they opened the temple and pushed Rao out from the other end of the hole. He was then taken into custody and booked for trespassing. On October the 9th of 2020, Jennifer Lynn Faith and her husband James left their Dallas home to walk their dog around the neighborhood. A sudden barrage of gunfire left 49-year-old James, an American Airlines executive, with 7 critical gunshot wounds, to which he ultimately succumbed. In the immediate aftermath, Jennifer portrayed herself as a grieving widow, pleading for members of the general public with information about her husband's killer to come forward. In an interview with a local media outlet, the woman recounted the fateful incident, saying, "I heard running behind me and I turned around and all of a sudden somebody just started shooting at him," calling the situation devastating. Investigators got a break in the case the following January when they arrested 48-year-old Darren Ruben Lopez and charged him with the murder. Lopez, a Tennessee resident, was accused of driving all the way to the Faith's home in Dallas, where he laid in wait until the couple took their dog out for a walk. He gunned James down with a .45 caliber handgun, which was later found inside his Dixon County residence. It subsequently emerged that Jennifer and Lopez had dated in high school and college. The woman admitted to texting him daily to help him through a recent divorce, but denied any intimate involvement with her husband's killer. Upon seizing the pair's cell phones, however, detectives unearthed over 14,000 calls and texts they'd exchanged between September the 30th and October the 30th, many of which involved Jennifer coaching Lopez on what to say to law enforcement and how to hide evidence of the crime. In early 2021, the manipulative woman was charged with 1 count of destruction of an object with the intent to obstruct a federal investigation after factory resetting her phone in order to hide her damning communications with Lopez. In September, prosecutors added a charge of interstate commerce in the commission of murder for hire, accusing her of persuading Lopez to commit the murder by falsely convincing him that she was being abused and also providing him with financial compensation. Jennifer pleaded guilty in February of 2022 and in June was sentenced to life in prison. Lopez entered a plea of not guilty and, as of the latest updates, was awaiting trial at the Dallas County Jail. Number 6. Boris Ristevski. Australian woman Karen Ristevski went missing on June the 29th of 2016, having last been seen at her family's Avondale Heights residence. The 47-year-old's whereabouts weren't determined until 8 months later, when a group of horticulturists came upon her remains beneath a pile of tree branches in Mayston Regional Park. The subsequent autopsy was inconclusive in determining the cause of Karen's death. The woman's loved ones laid her to rest during a funeral service in which her husband, Boris, served as a pallbearer. By all accounts, the man seemed an innocent, grieving widower. However, in December of 2017, following an extensive police investigation involving audio recording devices and thorough analysis of CCTV footage, the authorities filed criminal charges against Boris in connection to his wife's death. The man eventually confessed to the killing, but refrained from providing a description of how she died. Prosecutors were unable to prove murderous intent on Boris's part, and he thus agreed to a plea bargain on the lesser charge of manslaughter, which carries a maximum penalty of 20 years in prison. During a pre-sentencing hearing in the Supreme Court of Victoria, the couple's daughter, Sarah, refused to provide a victim impact statement, instead giving her father a glowing character reference. Criminal psychologist Laura Richards subsequently stated her belief that Sarah had been manipulated by her father into supporting him despite his guilty plea. Boss was sentenced to 9 years in prison, with his daughter's testimony likely serving as a mitigating factor for his seemingly lenient punishment. Number 5. Craig Rouget. In 2007, a man from the English Channel island of Guernsey was given a life sentence for the murder of 21-year-old James Dean in St. Peter Port. Years later, while Craig Rouget was incarcerated at HM Prison Dartmoor, he faced further criminal charges after it emerged that he'd conspired with his girlfriend to smuggle the synthetic cannabinoid, spice, as well as mobile phones into prison. Rouget, then in his early 30s, allegedly manipulated mother of one, Katie Hayes, into doing his nefarious bidding by falsely promising her marriage. In court, Hayes was described as a scared and vulnerable young woman whom her imprisoned lover had taken full advantage of. She reportedly helped him sneak the contraband into prison by way of sheets of paper that had been soaked in the Class B drug. Both Rouget and Hayes pleaded guilty to what Plymouth Crown Court Judge Robert Linford called an extremely serious offense. In early 2022, Rouget had 2 years and 10 months added to his life sentence, while Hayes was given a suspended 12-month jail sentence and was also ordered to perform 180 hours of unpaid work. Number 4. Melina Roberge. A luxury cruise ship called the MSC Princess was raided by Australian Border Force officials with sniffer dogs shortly after docking in Sydney on August 28th of 2016. Officers reportedly found 35 kilograms of cocaine in the cabin, being shared by Canadian influencers Melina Roberge, a former escort, and Isabelle Lagasse, an ex-adult film star. An additional 60 kilograms of the illicit substance was discovered in the cabin belonging to 65-year-old Andre Tamine. The 95 total kilograms, valued at upwards of $16 million, was reported as the record for cocaine smuggled in luggage through an Australian air or seaport. The 3 Quebec natives were arrested and charged for their alleged roles in the drug smuggling operation. In court, 24-year-old Roberge claimed to have initially refused to take part in the 7-week cruise, but was manipulated into doing it by her unnamed sugar daddy. She indicated that she and Lagasse were simply tasked with making the smuggling operation look like a glamorous vacation, while others had been responsible for overseeing the actual collection of the drugs. A tearful Roberge was sentenced to 8 years in prison during a hearing in New South Wales District Court in 2018. Her counterpart received a 7.5-year sentence of her own. In May of 2021, having served her minimum sentence, Roberge was released from Australian prison, at which point she was deported back to Canada. She co-authored a book about her experience, while Lagasse reportedly signed an agreement with a Canadian production company to make a documentary about her personal story, aiming to dissuade others from getting involved in drug trafficking. Number 3. Joanna Denny. Over a 10-day period in March of 2013, 3 men were found dead from apparent stab wounds, with each of their bodies having been dumped in ditches outside the city of Peterborough, in Cambridgeshire, England. The first victim was Lukas Slabaszewski, a Polish national. The next 2 were property developer Kevin Lee and John Chapman, both of whom were killed on March the 29th. Lee was found the following day, his body having been dressed in a black sequined dress and posed suggestively in a ditch near Newborough. Shortly after the killings, a pair of male dog walkers were stabbed in the street in the cathedral city of Hereford, but both of them ultimately survived. Investigators eventually identified the perpetrator of each of the stabbings as Cambridgeshire woman Joanna Denny, who'd been aided in her killing spree by 2 men, Gary Stretch and Leslie Layton. The woman allegedly sought to kill 9 men in total, expressing a desire for her and Stretch to be like Bonnie and Clyde. Denny was accused of carrying out the murders for the sake of entertainment, at one point telling her accomplice, "I want my fun. I need you to get me my fun." In November of 2013, she pleaded guilty to each of the 3 killings, as well as the 2 additional attempted murders. Following a psychiatric evaluation, she was diagnosed with psychopathic, antisocial, and borderline personality disorders. In court, it was described how Denny had cast a spell over her male accomplices and manipulated them into doing things she wanted. The men were nevertheless punished for their actions. Stretch was found guilty of attempted murder and sentenced to a minimum of 19 years in prison, while Layton was jailed for 14 years after being convicted of perverting the course of justice. In February of 2014, Denny received a life sentence, with the presiding Old Bailey judge recommended that she never be released. Number 2. Mia Khalifa. During an appearance on the BBC show Hard Talk in September of 2019, social media influencer Mia Khalifa opened up about how she'd been manipulated into working in the adult film industry for 3 months. Back in 2014, she'd allegedly been approached on the street by people who told her she'd be well suited for nude modeling. Khalifa was subsequently given a tour of an adult film production studio before being convinced to sign a contract with jargon she didn't understand. The Lebanon-born celebrity began using a prominent social media presence to post fashion and travel content after her brief stint in adult films came to an end in 2015. She recounted being intimidated and scared by production executives who coerced her into continuing to perform despite her expressed desire to stop. Khalifa indicated that her adult film career had caused her family to disown her, which left her feeling alienated and alone. Number 1. Dion Timms Williams. In the early morning hours of July the 20th of 2021, consultant psychiatrist and father of 2 Gary Jenkins was cruelly beaten and tortured in a city park in Cardiff, Wales. The incident, which ultimately proved fatal for Jenkins 16 days later, was described as a prolonged homophobic attack carried out by a trio of assailants, 2 male and 1 female. The police subsequently arrested Dion Timms Williams, who was 16 at the time, on suspicion of being involved in the assault. Shortly thereafter, investigators reached out to Timms Williams' friend, 18-year-old Lewis Newman, for an interview. Newman claimed that the accused teenager had been staying with him on the night of the attack. Detectives gathered from other witnesses that Timms Williams had spoken about being with a pair of homeless men on the night in question and admitted to getting in a fight in Butte Park, where Jenkins was accosted. Newman was consequently taken into custody on a charge of perverting the course of justice after the police determined his testimony to have been false. In court, the young man was described as naive and having been in awe of Timms Williams, who used his feelings for her to manipulate him into helping her cover up the crime. Timms Williams and the 2 men accused of taking part in the attack with her were each sentenced to life in prison. For his role in the subsequent cover-up, Newman was sentenced to 6 months in a young offenders institution, suspended for 12 months. He was also ordered to perform 150 hours of unpaid work and pay a victim surcharge. On November the 23rd of 2022, Russian police responding to a missing persons report went to the home of 27-year-old Yuliana in St. Petersburg. Officers found the woman's lifeless body wrapped in plastic in a rubble sack, along with construction debris. Her remains exhibited signs of bruising along with what appeared to be a wire mark around her neck. Yuliana, who reportedly worked as a hairstylist, had last been seen on CCTV footage getting into the elevator of her apartment building. A man whom local police named as Almaz Ibraev was captured using the same elevator to leave the unit sometime later. It emerged that Yuliana had hired 41-year-old Ibraev to do some work around her new apartment. While a motive wasn't officially disclosed for the murder, local law enforcement suspected that Yuliana had gone to check on the handyman's work and that she was dissatisfied with how it had turned out. They believed that Ibraev killed her in a fit of rage because he thought that he wouldn't be paid. He bludgeoned her in the head with an unknown heavy object and then fatally strangled her. Following the discovery of Yuliana's body, Ibraev was arrested outside a hostel on November the 27th. Number 6. Brian Pennington. On the morning of September the 8th of 2010, handyman Brian Pennington arrived unannounced at the home of Kansas woman Marty Hill, for whom he'd done some work a few weeks prior. Pennington, at the time in his mid-20s, told the woman that he wanted to show her something that needed fixing in the basement. As they reached the bottom of the stairs, Pennington grabbed Hill's throat and choked her unconscious. Hill would remember nothing past that point. Her co-workers called the police after the graphic artist missed a weekly operations meeting later that morning. Hill was found in the basement, covered in blood and clinging to life. Pennington had broken her jaw, fractured her skull, and stabbed her in the neck at least 7 times. Hill was hospitalized and doctors weren't sure whether she'd survive, but after nearly 2 weeks, she was able to speak and named her attacker. Pennington, a married father of 2, was arrested at his home. He had scratches on his face, which she tried to blame on a dog attack. A pair of jeans found at the bottom of his laundry hamper was submitted for DNA analysis and tested positive for Hill's blood. Pennington pleaded guilty to attempted murder in November of 2011, and he was sentenced to 28 years in prison. Aside from scars and other complications from the nearly fatal incident, Hill also struggled to come to grips with not knowing why the handyman had attacked her. The woman was neither abused nor robbed, and Pennington never gave a motive for his horrific actions. Number 5. Shahbaz Khan. On October the 1st of 2020, Dr. Saman Mir Sakhavi, aged 49, and her teenage daughter, Vian Mangrio, were found dead at their home in Burnley, Lancashire, England, after law enforcement had been called to perform a welfare check. The property was damaged by smoke and fire, but investigators deduced that Saman and Vian had been killed prior to an attempt to set their bodies ablaze, which had only affected the latter's remains. Saman suffered fatal compression to her neck, and her daughter succumbed to asphyxia, and both had been drugged with diazepam prior to their deaths. There was writing on the wall that read, "My mum is evil, this is a COVID house, and help me." It would later be determined to have been a cynical attempt by their killer to place the blame on the teenager. Through CCTV, telephone records, and witness evidence, investigators deduced that they'd been murdered by a handyman, Shahbaz Khan. After they'd moved from Pakistan to the UK for Vian's studies, the mother and daughter had relied on 52-year-old Shahbaz and his wife, Rabia, for help in building their lives in the UK. Shahbaz had done odd jobs and construction work on their home, which he was expected to continue on September the 30th of 2020. On that date, he spiked a smoothie with which he drugged Saman and then killed her, before doing the same to her daughter. When the handyman was arrested at his home on October the 4th, the police searched the property and discovered a bag containing items of gold jewelry worth tens of thousands of dollars, which belonged to Saman. 45-year-old Rabia was also arrested following several failed attempts of fabricating an alibi for Khan. After initially pleading not guilty, Khan changed his plea towards the end of his trial in October of 2021 and was given a life sentence with a 34-year minimum term. His wife was jailed for 20 months for perverting the course of justice. Number 4. Esdras Marroquin Gomez. On November the 9th of 2015, New York socialite Lois Coley was found dead in the laundry room of her home on Windswept Farm, a 300-acre estate in North Salem. Investigators discovered a pin from a discharged fire extinguisher near her battered body. An extensive search of the property resulted in the fire extinguisher being found, wrapped in a plastic bag, in a pond. The presence of Coley's DNA on the device led investigators to conclude that the elderly woman had been bludgeoned to death with it. 83-year-old Coley was the wife of a millionaire McDonald's franchisee with roughly 100 restaurants, and she lived in a wealthy area. Esdras Marroquin Gomez, also known as Victor, had been employed as a day laborer and handyman by the family. He wasn't, however, working for them at the time of Coley's death. The undocumented Guatemalan worker became a suspect after he'd fled to his native country less than a week after the murder, and then to Mexico. The man, at the time in his early 30s, was eventually deported, and the FBI arrested him when he landed in Miami on a connecting flight. It later emerged that Gomez had gone to the farm to ask for money he'd felt he was owed after previously suffering an injury on the job. His lawyer would argue that he hadn't intended to kill anyone but lost control upon running into Coley. Gomez pleaded guilty to second-degree murder and was given the maximum sentence of 22 years to life in prison by a Westchester County court. Number 3. Todd Perkins. In August of 2018, handyman Todd Perkins was embroiled in a dispute with the residents of a property on 365 Santa Fe Drive in Denver, Colorado. He'd recently been fired from his position after repeated arguments with the landlord and tenants. On August the 14th, the disgruntled handyman broke into the fourplex through an apartment. He disconnected gas pipes in the building's basement and left the valves open, filling the room with gas. As reported by the Denver Fire Department, he then poured gasoline on the floor and turned the furnace up to 82 degrees in order to trigger an explosion. It occurred faster than Perkins had expected, and he was caught in the massive blast upon reaching the top of the basement stairs. The handyman was launched through the front wall and into the street, where rescuers found him buried under a pile of rubble. The explosion ravaged the building, injuring 8 people, but no fatalities were reported. 56-year-old Perkins was identified as the prime suspect after the authorities had smelled gasoline on him while he was being taken to the hospital. He faced a plethora of charges that included attempted first-degree murder, arson, and assault. In the trial that followed, Perkins' defense argued that he was being made into a scapegoat and hadn't been responsible for the explosion. He was ultimately found guilty and sentenced to 195 years in prison. Number 2. Kelvin James. English handyman Kelvin James and London-based gynecologist Marie Gervil met in April of 2020 when the latter sought help with her guttering. They eventually struck up a romantic relationship that lasted from late 2020 to early 2021. Following their breakup, they maintained a distant friendship that mainly involved text exchanges. In the summer of 2021, James reportedly started struggling with his mental health, and Gervil agreed to meet with him. The man briefly borrowed her Renault Megane, claiming that he needed it for a painting job after his van had broken down. In the following weeks, James began sending Gervil jealous texts, asking about her whereabouts and the company she kept, after she'd refused to resume their relationship. On November the 16th, Gervil was stopped by the police after leaving a pub in the Up Holland area of Lancashire. She tested negative for a breathalyzer, and officers told her that they'd received an anonymous tip she'd caused a disturbance at the pub. The following day, James messaged Gervil, insisting they meet and telling her that he'd driven past the venue that she'd visited a few days earlier. The traffic stop and the handyman's message caused the 52 to suspect that her ex had been stalking her. She took her Megane to a garage and found that a tracker had been placed on it. Gervil called the police and obtained a restraining order. James was questioned and admitted to installing the tracker without the woman's permission or knowledge and monitoring her movements through an app on his phone. He told the police that he'd done it for his own peace of mind. The man, who had a 1998 conviction for harassment on his record, admitted stalking and was given a 12-month community sentence and an electronically monitored 12-week night curfew. He was also ordered to perform rehabilitation activities and banned from contacting Gervil for at least a year. The doctor expressed disappointment regarding his punishment, as it hadn't taken into account the serious distress the incident had caused her. Gervil lost 80% of her hair from stress-related alopecia, was diagnosed with PTSD, and couldn't work for months. Number 1. Daniel James Berda. In July of 2018, former child actor Dennis Day disappeared from his home in Phoenix, Oregon, and for 9 months, his condition remained unknown. The 76-year-old was a founding cast member on the first 2 seasons of Walt Disney's Mickey Mouse Club TV series in the 1950s. At the time of Day's disappearance, his 88-year-old husband, Henry Ernest Caswell, a dementia sufferer, had been hospitalized after suffering a series of falls. He remained in an assisted living facility and died in September. Once Day was reported missing, the police conducted several separate searches of his 1,800-square-foot home, as neighbors had complained that a foul smell was coming from it. The searches didn't produce any results. It wouldn't be until early April of 2019, after the story had become national news, that badly decomposed human remains, which were subsequently confirmed as Days, were found on the property. Local law enforcement didn't elaborate on how the previous searches had failed to uncover his corpse. On July the 5th of 2019, Oregon State Police arrested 36-year-old Daniel James Berda in connection to Day's death. He'd been living with the couple while working for them as a handyman. On July the 15th of 2018, Day had visited a friend and told him that he wanted to go to the police station because Berta had hurt him. The station was closed that evening, so they made plans to go the following morning, but Day didn't show up and was never seen alive again. When he was initially interviewed, Berta stated that the elderly man had told him he was going to visit some friends and that he'd return in a few days. He was reportedly observed on body camera footage exhibiting obvious battle wounds on his hands and forearms. Less than a week after Day was reported missing, the former Mouseketeers Ford Escort was found in the possession of two women, Lori Nicholson and Wanda Garcia, about 200 miles away from his home in Coos County. Nicholson claimed that Day had given them permission to use the vehicle, but months later admitted that she'd acquired it after going to Day's home with Berta. She and Garcia had become concerned by the latter's erratic behavior, as he was allegedly under the influence of methamphetamine and fled in the Escort. They were charged with 1 count of unauthorized use of a vehicle. With Berta in custody, prosecutors argued that he'd shoved Day to the ground during an argument and then took no further action to prevent his death. He hid his body under a pile of clothes, where it was discovered months later with the aid of cadaver dogs. The two men had reportedly had several altercations because Day didn't want the handyman to live at the property anymore. Berta's charges included manslaughter, criminally negligent homicide, and identity theft. He pleaded not guilty. His case was ongoing as of the latest updates, as was a lawsuit filed by Day's family against Phoenix law enforcement, accusing them of negligence. The suit claimed that they'd falsely reported to have brought cadaver dogs to the house during their initial searches, and that officers unknowingly stepped on Day's dead body, causing fractures. Those aspects, enhanced by the severe decomposition of the corpse, were considered as highly detrimental to the criminal case against Berta. Number 8. Bismarck Espinoza Martinez. In November of 2018, Florida woman Carla Stefaniak was visiting Costa Rica to celebrate her 36th birthday. The day before she was due to return on the 27th, she disappeared from the Airbnb where she'd been staying in Escazú. She'd messaged friends that it was pretty sketchy at her resort, as there was heavy rain and no power, adding that she might ask a security guard to get her a water bottle. Stefaniak's friends and family raised the alarm after they'd lost contact with the woman, who'd typically share the events of her holiday with them and on social media. Police dogs later found her body several hundred feet from the Villa Lemas complex, half naked, wrapped in plastic and partially buried. She had died from stab wounds and blunt force trauma to the head. 32-year-old security guard Bismarck Espinoza Martinez was arrested after he'd contradicted himself in the statements given to the police. He'd claimed to have last seen Stefaniak at around 5 a.m. when he'd allegedly helped her load her luggage into a taxi, heading for the airport. It was an odd report, particularly since Stefaniak's flight was in the afternoon. Investigators concluded that Martinez had used his position to enter Stefaniak's room, where he tried to abuse her and then killed her when she fought back. The security guard, reported as an illegal immigrant from Nicaragua, then moved the body to a different area and buried it. Martinez was ultimately sentenced to 16 years in prison and ordered to pay Stefaniak's family over $50,000. The victim's relatives were outraged by this decision, as they wanted a maximum sentence of 50 years. Number 7. Incident at Manchester Victoria Station. In October of 2016, a factory worker was caught smoking at Manchester Victoria Station in England and was chased by 4 security guards for an estimated 9 minutes. Harrowing body cam footage would show the guards restraining and pinning 27-year-old Jack Barnes to the ground. Pressure was applied to his neck, and Barnes said that he couldn't breathe a total of 7 times. One of the security guards was recorded uttering, "I'll tell you what, I'll just put him out." Barnes suffered a cardiac arrest, and the restraint continued for a few minutes before anyone checked his condition. He was taken to a hospital but never regained consciousness and was pronounced dead several weeks later. The evidence was initially considered insufficient for manslaughter charges, but a coroner would subsequently rule his killing unlawful, prompting the launch of another inquest. It was argued that Paul Fogarty, Brian Gartside, Matthew Sellers, and Stephen Rowlands had used excessive and unreasonable force in restraining Barnes. They never expressed any remorse for their actions, in spite of the fact that a walk-away policy was in place, and they were never allowed to chase down Barnes in the first place. Synthetic cannabinoids were found in the victim's system but weren't believed to have contributed to his death, as it was mainly attributed to the violence he'd experienced at the hands of the guards. Number 6. Stephen Michael Duxbury. In October of 2015, a security guard at an apartment complex in Orlando, Florida, was arrested for the first-degree murder and assault of a resident. 27-year-old Sasha Samsudeen had returned to her Uptown Place home following a night of drinking with friends. CCTV cameras captured her at around 1:45 a.m. in the company of 33-year-old Stephen Michael Duxbury, the building's only security guard. According to police documents, the footage showed her bumping into walls, apparently intoxicated. The following day, officers performed a welfare check after Samsudeen's worried friends had failed to reach her. The police found her lifeless body curled up in a blanket on her bed. The young woman had been strangled to death. Her blouse was ripped apart and there was a condom wrapper nearby. Her underwear and purse were missing. In the aftermath, Duxbury was questioned by the police but said he'd never been to her apartment and had merely tried to help Samsudeen find her keys. He gave the officers a story about a mystery man whom he'd allegedly seen pursuing her, but the evidence against him began to pile up. The day after Samsudeen's body was found, he had bite marks and fresh injuries on his forearms. The police picked up Duxbury's fingerprint from the toilet seat in Samsudeen's bathroom, and footprints on the floor of the crime scene matched shoes recovered from his home. Duxbury's phone records showed searches about ways of getting around the keypad lock model on her apartment door. It became evident that instead of protecting Samsudeen, as was his job, Duxbury had broken into her home, abused, and then killed her. It took a jury just 4 hours to find him guilty, and he was sentenced to life in prison. Number 5. Franz Arestil. In August of 2021, an NYU security guard was charged with attempted murder after attacking his supervisor with a machete-like weapon. 38-year-old Franz Arestil and his victim, who was only identified as a 48-year-old man, were arguing about the mandatory screening process in effect at the university. The daily screener is a set of questions on a smartphone app which needed to be completed in order to be allowed access to NYU buildings. It was only available to vaccinated people or those with proof of a negative COVID-19 test. Arestil had to be sent home earlier in the week after refusing to undergo the screening process. Following the argument, which occurred on July the 24th at around 1 a.m., Arestil repeatedly struck the victim with the large knife. Surveillance footage showed him running for his life out of the Broome Street Residence Hall, with Arestil in pursuit. At the time, there were no students present. The victim survived but required extensive surgery after being left with a collapsed lung and several broken ribs. Arestil, a past recipient of NYU's Service Award for his 15 years as a public safety employee, was released on bail pending his next court appearance. Number 4. Robert Paval. In February of 2020, a woman was killed at Timberland's headquarters in Stratham, New Hampshire. The attacker was identified as 20-year-old security guard Robert Paval. In the aftermath, he was charged with both first-degree and second-degree murder in the death of marketing director Catherine Hepner, aged 46. The first charge stemmed from Paval stabbing Hepner either before, during, or after abusing her, and the second-degree charge was for him recklessly causing her death while manifesting extreme indifference to the value of human life. Paval pled not guilty and was held without bail. A lawsuit that Hepner's husband subsequently initiated against Securitas, the security guard's employer, claimed that he'd been hired negligently and that there'd been clear red flags which weren't addressed. They included Paval using marijuana and psychedelic drugs at work, as well as him allegedly suffering mental breakdowns that went unreported by his supervisor. Securitas denied responsibility, but the case is ongoing. Number 3. Clive Carter. In November of 2012, in a horrific fit of rage, security guard Clive Carter beat a medical conference delegate to death with a fire extinguisher. Thai woman Kanakporn Satchawat was meant to attend an HIV drug therapy conference at Glasgow's Clyde Auditorium over a 5-day period. She was booked at the Marriott and had previously written on Facebook how excited she was to visit Scotland. 35-year-old Carter was working security at the conference. Satchawat had reportedly complained about repeatedly being asked to show him a conference ID pass. This enraged Carter, who by his own account heard the words "die, just die" in his head while arguing with Satchawat. The 6'5" security guard followed the pharmaceutical manager, who weighed less than 100 pounds, into the women's bathroom. It was there that he repeatedly struck her with a fire extinguisher so hard that every bone on the left side of her face and neck was broken and her skull was shattered to pieces. 2 French doctors would later find Satchawat unresponsive, lying in a pool of her own blood. After the attack, Carter hid his blood-stained blazer and cleaned the fire extinguisher. He then went to the staff room and calmly ate the sandwiches he'd bought for lunch. Following his arrest, Carter claimed he had no memory of the events after their argument, and that as a borderline personality disorder sufferer, he wasn't responsible for his actions. It was later revealed that he'd harbored an obsession for fire extinguishers and even had a photo of one on his computer. 8 days before killing Satchawat, he was working security at a Holiday Inn Express on Stockwell Street. Stephanie O'Brien, aged 24, was staying with 3 friends at the hotel. Carter knocked on their door with the fire extinguisher, claiming he was there to put out a fire. O'Brien fortunately managed to close and lock the door on him. For the brutal killing of Satchawat, Carter was sentenced to life in prison with a minimum of 20 years served. Number 2. Christopher Emmons. In June of 2018, on the south side of Chicago, a liquor store security guard fatally injured a suspected shoplifter. While reviewing surveillance footage, 57-year-old Christopher Emmons noticed a man stealing a bottle from the store. He would later be identified as 33-year-old Herbert Lemon. The next time that he visited the store, Emmons put on a pair of gloves and locked the door. As Lemon approached the counter with a beer bottle, Emmons punched him in the face twice without warning. The security cameras, which also had audio capabilities, recorded no verbal exchange between the men. Emmons dragged Lemon outside of the camera's view and continued to beat him. He then helped him to his feet, only to strike him a few more times. When officers arrived at the scene, Lemon claimed that he didn't want to press charges. A few hours later, his girlfriend found him unresponsive at his home. He was rushed to the hospital with brain hemorrhage and underwent emergency surgery. After the operation, doctors observed no sign of brain activity and Lemon was pulled off life support. The ruling of the Cook County Medical Examiner's Office was homicide from the multiple blows to the head that he'd sustained. Emmons was charged with murder. It wasn't the first charge of its kind that he'd faced. Prior to being hired as a security guard, he'd spent 23 years in prison for murder, and his record also featured convictions for unlawful use of a weapon as well as arson. Number 1. Steve Bouquet. From October of 2018 to June of 2019, shopping center security guard Steve Bouquet stabbed at least 16 pet cats in the seaside resort city of Brighton, England. The affected owners were left heartbroken upon finding their beloved pets bleeding in the street. Bouquet, an ex-Navy gunner in his early 50s, killed 9 of the felines and maimed 7 others during his campaign of cruelty, although it's believed he may have been responsible for many other attacks. The police spent months searching for the faceless and nameless killer who terrorized Brighton residents, leaving them fearful for the safety of their pets. The break in the case came from footage captured by a CCTV camera, which a homeowner had set up to monitor the alleyway outside his house. The footage showed Bouquet stopping to pet Hendrix, a 9-month-old black kitten belonging to the homeowner. Bouquet pulled something from his rucksack and made sudden jerks forward, causing Hendrix to flee. The pet later died from his injuries. After the police arrested the security guard, they tied him to other crimes based on cell phone location data. Additionally, photos of the cats were found on his phone and feline DNA was discovered on the blade of a knife in his home. In court, Bouquet claimed that he wasn't a threat to animals, as owners expressed the pain they'd felt from losing their pets or seeing them suffer. No reason was provided for what one prosecutor dubbed an unusual and extremely traumatic offense. Bouquet, dubbed the Brighton Cat Killer, was sentenced to over 5 years in jail. Thanks for watching. For a month, would you rather work as a security guard in the most dangerous neighborhood of your city or leave your front door unlocked? Let us know in the comments section below.